I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Today we are looking at the Caddx Ratel, a new camera from Caddx, and unlike most of my videos where I would start you off in the studio and with my pretty face talking about the camera and go through I'm just going to show you the freaking footage from this camera because, to be completely blunt, I really think it speaks for itself. There are very few cameras these days that legitimately impress me, and that's why you haven't seen me review a camera in a long freaking time. The Runcam Eagle has been my favorite for a long time, but to be honest with you, the Ratel might dethrone it. The Ratel does most of the things that I like about the Eagle. It does very little of the main thing that people hate, which is that digital image noise. And it's about 10 or 15 bucks cheaper depending on where you get it. So yeah, Caddx Ratel. Let's take a look at some sample footage from it, and then we'll go back to the studio and we'll break it down. Here you can see me testing another thing the Ratel doesn't do, which is that white flash that the Eagle is known for. On the JB edition of the Micro Eagle, we turn the max gain setting down to 1 to try and minimize the white flash, but it still can happen. On the default settings on the Eagle, the white flash when you do backflips can blind you for a second or more. The Ratel doesn't do it. One of the places where CMOS cameras like the Ratel kick the pants off of CCD cameras like the old Swift is in dynamic range. You can see in the shadows here on this sunny day that the shadows are not just black blobs. You can actually see details in the shadows. As we go from a sunny area here into the trees, into a shadowy area, it is not just a black blob until the exposure algorithm adjusts. You can see what you're flying into and you can avoid details. A higher contrast image looks better if we're just looking at a photograph, but if we're actually looking as a pilot, we want that increased dynamic range. For contrast, here's a flight I did on a more overcast day. Instead of a sunny day with very clear shadows, the lighting is a lot more flat and there just aren't very many shadows. Here I think the camera doesn't excel quite as much. The picture is kind of flat and not as many details really jump out. I might almost like to turn the saturation down a bit. On this spring day, the image is just kind of like a big wash of green. The camera is still perfectly usable, and we might be able to go in and tweak the brightness or contrast just a bit to make this a little better. Still, I think it's absolutely usable. As we look into the sky here, we've got great detail. Actually looks kind of nice. The exposure algorithm is not being fooled by having the sky in the view. Everything is really, really good. So now you've seen the image that the Caddx Ratel produces in flight, and that alone is going to be enough to either make or break the camera for some of you. And I really mean break the camera because there are still people out there who just hate the style of image that you get from a CMOS sensor. I have bad news for you guys. CCD cameras are more and more rare. All the new cameras coming out use CMOS sensors. Why? I don't know. They just do. So you better find a CMOS camera that you like. Because you're going to end up there. In fact, the best looking CMOS image I've seen so far is the Runcam Micro Eagle. Now, a lot of people think that the Micro Eagle has too much digital image shimmer, and so did I. And that's why when I made the JB edition of the Micro Eagle, I turned the sharpening detail down. Caddx, I don't know if their defaults are just better or if they're doing something different with the sensor, but they really have a great balance between image detail, great dynamic range, and not too much over sharpening or shimmer. Now, some of you may be suspicious that by comparing the Caddx to the JB Micro Eagle, I'm just blatantly taking an opportunity to plug my own camera. That's not true. I actually think these cameras are very similar in the way that they produce an image and the way that they handle light. I'm curious if Caddx is using a similar or even the same image sensor, just a little bit of different processing algorithm. If you look at the menus of the two cameras, they're kind of similar in their font, and I don't know, but they're very similar cameras. So how are they different then? Well, the Caddx is cheaper. Caddx has always produced cheaper cameras. The Caddx comes in at about 35 bucks. The Micro Eagle has always been a $45 or $50 camera, and that's even before I slapped my initials on it. There's no YouTuber markup on it. It's just always been a more expensive camera. Now, as far as what you get, Caddx has always been just a little bit lower than Runcam in terms of build quality. Albert Kim, I watched his review of this camera, and he reviews a lot more cameras than I do. It's one of his specialties. He mentioned that Caddx cameras sometimes come from the factory with the lens unfocused or with a little bit of dust in the sensor, and that you may, when you first get a Caddx camera, have to take a second to focus the lens, whereas Runcams will typically come pre-focused. Well, that's for a $10 difference. Maybe that's worth it for a lot of people. Another difference, and we're just going to make sure this with my good old calipers, is that the Caddx comes with, that's 11.84 millimeters. Is it the same size lens or smaller lens? 13.43. No. Okay, so the Caddx is coming with an M8 lens, whereas the JB Micro Eagle comes with an M12 lens. That larger lens is going to let a little bit more light through, give you a little bit better low light sensitivity, and some people would say overall better image quality. Other people would say it's kind of hard to notice the difference. In my experience, the smaller lenses, what I've noticed most about the M8 lenses is that they tend to have just a little bit more fisheye and just a little bit more problem with lens flare. But as far as, lines of resolution, I think the difference is subtle to unrecognizable. Now, I've been testing the Ratel with the 2.1 millimeter lens on it. It also comes with a 1.66 millimeter lens, which would be even wider angle. I tend to not like ultra wide angle lenses for freestyle, but 2.1 is about where I like it to be. However, simply comparing the focal length isn't enough to tell you everything you need to know about the lens's field of view. So let's compare the field of view of the Ratel to that of the Micro Eagle. So I'm just going to press this against the square here, and you can see exactly what the field of view is. And then I'm gonna change it. It's right now in 4:3 mode. Let's change it to 16:9. Now at this point I got pretty confused because the Ratel has a 16:9 widescreen sensor in it. So you would expect that it would make a 4:3 image by slicing off the sides. In other words, you would expect the vertical field of view to be the same when going between 4:3 and 16:9, and you would expect the horizontal field of view to be wider in 16:9 and narrower in 4:3, but that is not what we observe. You can see that I've chopped off the top of the image here because that's exactly what the Ratel does as well. And this makes no freaking sense to me, but that's what it does. So here are the two fields of views of the Ratel in 4:3 and 16:9 mode. So here's the JB Micro Eagle under exactly the same conditions. And let's just change that image from 4:3 to 16:9. Notice it changes instantly. You don't have to save and exit. That's kind of nice. I've done this before with the Eagle. I'm really sure that the Eagle cuts off the sides. And folks, it was only when I was editing the videos and could really compare the screenshots that I noticed the most important difference between the Ratel and the Eagle. And that is that the Ratel has a much larger vertical field of view than the Eagle when it's in 4:3 mode. So look at the 16:9 Eagle versus the 16:9 Ratel. The field of view is very similar, but the Ratel is just a little more zoomed in and the Eagle is just a little bit wider. But if we compare that to the Ratel in 4:3 mode, we see that the Ratel has a much larger vertical field of view and nearly the same horizontal field of view as the Eagle. In other words, if you fly in 4:3 with the Ratel with a 2.1 millimeter lens, you're seeing a lot more above and below and just the same amount as wide. A much larger overall field of view for the Ratel. Now, one of the things I've always liked about the Eagle is the adjustability of its image. And the Ratel has similar, if not exactly identical, adjustability. The place you're going to want to go with the Ratel is in the menu. You're going to go to the Image Enhance menu, and then you've got Contrast, Sharpness, and Color Gain. And those are the three main ways I think you're going to be likely to adjust the image. The contrast is kind of like the WDR setting on the Eagle. It allows you to choose a lower contrast image with more dynamic range or a higher contrast image that's a little bit more pleasing to look at, but maybe not as, I don't know, it depends on the situation, I guess. You can see as we turn the contrast up, there, now we're at the lowest value. Here's the highest value with a very dark shadows, and as we turn it down, the shadows get lighter and the contrast of the image as a whole gets worse. See, this I would probably not consider very usable. We're just getting to no contrast at all. But here at a contrast level of maybe about 20, we got some shadow detail. As we turn the contrast up, we get a much contrastier image, but with a little bit less shadow detail. If we set it to auto, it's just somewhere in the middle. For sharpness, I'm really curious how sharpness will play out, because raising sharpness too high brings in that digital image noise. And then you can see as I turn the sharpness up from the default level, what's the highest? So there's 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 0. Okay. So here's the highest sharpness level, which is just crazy over sharpened. Oh yeah, it's terrible. There's all kinds of shimmer, just awful. Whereas if we turn it all the way down to 0, there's just this super soft, almost watercolory image. The default value is about 5, a little bit less than half, or you can just set it on auto and it'll automatically do a pretty good job for you. Being able to tweak all of these things in the field is one great reason for having camera control set up on your quadcopter. Camera control, or the CAM-C function, lets you adjust these menus without ever plugging in a joystick to the camera. You can use your transmitter sticks. I've got a video about setting up camera control. There's 2 ways of doing it: analog camera control or the Runcam camera control adapter, which works off of a UART on your quad. I'll put links to those videos down in the video description if you want to learn to set that up. It's one of those things that you don't realize until you've got it how much you were missing it. Kind of like smart audio. You know, if you work with smart audio, you probably can't live without it. Camera control is also like that. The ability to easily tweak brightness, dynamic range, and so forth based on the lighting conditions, instead of having to have one set of camera settings for all lighting conditions, is a really big deal. Total game changer. Now, some people are referring to the Ratel as a starlight camera, which would mean that you could use it outdoors in almost like pitch blackness. It's starlight, basically. And I've seen true starlight cameras like the Night Owl or the Night Eagle from Runcam. This is not that. I'm really working the camera here by taking it outside in the dark, in the starlight. And you can see as I aim it back to the house, it does pick up some light from the house lights. And I have absolutely seen people fly this camera like at night on street lights or in a parking lot. If there's some ambient light, it's totally flyable, but I would not call it a true starlight camera. It just doesn't have that amazing level of sensitivity. Then again, those cameras are not very flyable during the day, so I think this is a great all-around camera for dusk flying, twilight flying, night flying in car parks or urban environments, but not a true starlight camera. There's a couple more things to talk about before we get to the conclusion of the review. Latency. The Ratel is advertised as having a latency of about 8 milliseconds, which is a very, very good latency for an FPV camera. The lowest latency cameras are down in the 12 to 16 millisecond range, and anything less than that is exceptional. Compare that to the Eagle, like we've been doing this whole review. The Eagle is on the higher end of average, 25, 30, 35 milliseconds, maybe even a little. There's some variance in the camera's latency. I don't know of anybody like Oscar Leong or RC Shim who has tested the actual latency of this camera to verify that number, but at least as far as Caddx is advertising, 8 milliseconds is quite a good latency, especially for a CMOS camera like this. All the additional processing that CMOS cameras tend to do tends to increase their latency. So that brings us to the last part of the review, which, as you may know, is the part where I remind you that this is my full-time job. Making videos like this, reviewing products, hopefully helping you spend your money a little bit smarter, learn something, maybe even entertaining you or making you chuckle. And if you value that, could I ask you to consider supporting me? One of the ways you can do that is you can click the product links down in the video description below this video and any of my other videos that have a product in it. Those are affiliate links, and when you click them and then you make any purchase after clicking that link, I get a small commission off of whatever you buy. So anytime you shop at Rotor Riot, Race Day Quads, Get FPV, Amazon, any of those at Banggood, any of those affiliated vendors, click the links down in the video description, make any purchase, this item, some other item, I don't care. I get a small commission and it does help, costs you nothing. The other way you can support me is by joining my Patreon at a price of $2 a month or more, if you like. You get access to my patrons-only Discord server and some other patrons-only benefits. Thank you guys so much for watching. What do you think? Is this like, is this the best looking CMOS camera you've ever seen? You could be honest. If it's better than the Micro Eagle, I'm not, you could tell me. It's really good, isn't it? CCD lovers, is this the one? Is this the one that's going to sway you? You got to pick one. CCD cameras are going away. Maybe this is the one. I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. Happy flying.